Colorado Territory, early October 1874, the wind smelled like ash and pine when Roman Beckett crossed the ridge and saw smoke rising from the valley below. He reined in his mare, eyes narrowing. There should not have been smoke out here, nothing but empty hills, old logging trails, and silence for miles. He leaned forward in the saddle, staring down at the small clearing half hidden by the bend of the trees. Something was wrong. He had been riding west for 3 days, trying to outrun memories that clung to him like burrs in his coat, blood on the floorboards, the sound of his brother's last breath, and the hollow ring of a door slamming shut behind him. He did not talk about it. He just kept riding. But now the smoke curled up too thin and sharp to be a campfire. More like a wreck, Roman nudged the mare forward, slow and careful, his rifle resting easy across the saddle. An old wagon lay tipped on its side near the edge of the ravine, one wheel shattered, canvas torn open like a wound. A scatter of broken crates lay around it. Blood stained the dirt, dark and dried. He dismounted. "Hello," he called out, voice low but steady, no answer. The pines creaked above him in the wind, then he heard it, a faint rustle, not wind, not animal, something softer, closer. Behind the fallen tree that arched near the wagon, split at the root and growing moss over its bark, he stepped around it, and there she was. Curled beneath the tree's sheltering trunk, a young woman crouched in the dirt, her dress torn at the sleeve, face smeared with dust. Her arms wrapped tightly around 2 small children, both asleep or unconscious, he could not tell. Her eyes were wide, wild with fear, but she did not move. Roman raised both hands. "It's all right. I am not here to hurt you," her voice cracked. "Are they gone?" She swallowed hard, shifting slightly to shield the children more. "3 men, they came out of nowhere, took everything, shot my uncle. I thought they were going to." Her throat tightened and she stopped, Roman's jaw clenched. He looked down at the boy and girl, both under the age of 10, their cheeks dirty, the girl's hand still clutching the woman's skirt. "You are safe now," he said. "I promise." She did not speak again for a long moment, then her eyes filled with tears. "They took the horses. I do not know how long we've been hiding." "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Nola," she whispered. "Nola Fairley, that's Grace and that's Gideon. They are my niece and nephew. Their mama's gone. I was taking them to my sister's place in Durango." Roman nodded, crouching beside her. "I am Roman Beckett. I can help you get there." She blinked, like the words took a second to settle. "You do not have to," she said, her voice shaking. "I know," he said, "but I will." He reached for Gideon first, lifting the boy in his arms. The child stirred, groaned softly, but did not wake. "Can you ride with Grace?" Roman asked Nola. She nodded, brushing the girl's hair back gently. "I can." Together, they got the children onto the mare. Roman steadied Nola as she climbed up behind Grace, gripping the reins with one hand while he walked beside them, guiding the horse down the trail. They made camp 2 miles northwest, near a shallow creek. The sun was low, casting long shadows through the trees. Roman built a fire and warmed some hardtack and beans. Nola sat close to the children, her arm around Grace, a blanket draped over her shoulders. When Gideon finally stirred awake, he looked up dazed. "Where's Uncle James?" Nola's face crumpled just for a second before she smoothed it out. "He is not coming, sweetheart." "But we are safe." Roman watched the way she held the boy, the way her voice stayed strong for them even when her hands trembled. There was something steady in her, something that had not broken, even when everything else had. Later, after the children fell asleep against her side, she looked across the fire at Roman. "Why are you out here?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then said, "Trying to forget things I cannot fix anymore." She nodded like she understood. "I lost my brother last spring," he said, voice low. "He was all I had left." Her eyes softened. "I am sorry." "Yeah," he said, staring into the flames. "Me too." Silence stretched between them, not awkward, just real. The kind of silence that happens when 2 people stop pretending they are all right. "You do not owe me anything," Roman said after a while. "But if you want, I will ride with you until we reach Durango. Make sure you get there safe." Nola looked at him, really looked at him. Then she nodded once. "Thank you," he nodded back. The next day, they rode slow through the hills, stopping often for the children. Roman hunted a rabbit near midday and showed Gideon how to clean it, patient and calm as the boy watched with wide eyes. Grace clung to Nola most of the time, but by nightfall, she let Roman lift her down from the saddle without crying. That night they made camp beneath a cluster of aspens. The leaves whispered above them, golden and bright against the sky. Nola sat beside Roman after the children fell asleep. She leaned her shoulder against his for just a moment. "I do not know how to thank you," she said. "You do not have to. I want to." He looked at her, the firelight catching the curve of her cheek, the weariness in her eyes. "You are doing more than enough," he said softly. She smiled, small and real, and Roman Beckett, who had not smiled in months, felt something crack open in him. Not pain, not this time, something else, hope. The trail narrowed as they moved west, threading through pine-shadowed slopes where frost clung to the lower branches by morning. A thin crust of ice cracked beneath the mare's hooves when they crossed shallow water, and Roman could feel the season turning in the wind, autumn leaning hard toward winter. By the third night, Grace had grown quiet in a way that tugged at Nola. The girl nestled close but didn't ask questions or hum to herself anymore. Roman noticed too, though he didn't say much. Instead, he carved a pine chip into the shape of a bird and handed it to her beside the fire, not looking for thanks. Grace turned it over in her hands, lips parted, her eyes following the curve of its wings before she tucked it into her coat. The next morning, Roman paused at a fork in the trail, studying the ruts left by wagon wheels long faded. Nola waited, one hand resting lightly on Gideon's back as the boy leaned forward in the saddle, watching a hawk circle above. "There's a homestead a few miles east," Roman said finally. "Old rancher keeps a smokehouse there. If he hasn't closed up for the season, we might trade for dried meat." Nola's brow creased. "Would we make it to your friend's place by dark after? We'd have to press the horses, but I think so." She nodded once. "If Grace gets real food in her, it's worth it." They turned east. The homestead was still standing, though the shutters rattled loose in the wind and the front fence leaned inward like it had grown tired of holding its shape. A man with a stovepipe hat and a gray beard stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand but not raised. Roman raised a hand. "Russell." "It's Beckett," the rifle lowered. "Well, you're a long way from the Gunnison Flats. Passing through, got young ones with me, wondered if your smokehouse is still running." Russell studied the group from his porch, his gaze pausing on Nola, then the children. "You pay fair, I'll trade." "Squirrel jerky, some salted pork, maybe a jar of beans." Roman nodded. "Got a good skin and a tin of coffee." "Then come on." Inside, the house smelled of cedar and tobacco. Nola kept the children close as Roman negotiated with Russell. The old man softened when Grace thanked him for the pork, her voice so small it barely carried. Back outside, Nola walked beside Roman as they made for the trail again. The late light made the mountains look bruised with shadow. "Folks know you here," she said, quiet. "Some do. Guess you weren't always riding alone." He didn't answer right away. "Then I worked cattle for a while, ran stock south of here, got out when things turned bad." Nola glanced over but didn't push. "You don't seem like a man who runs." "I don't," Roman said, voice even. "Unless there's no fighting left to do." For a while, the only sound was the horses and the wind. "When my sister asked me to take the children, I didn't know if I could raise them right," Nola said. "I'm not their mother. I was never even sure I'd be a wife." "You don't have to be sure," Roman said. "You're doing it anyway." She looked at him, the corners of her mouth twitching just slightly. They reached the edge of a ridge as dusk settled in. Roman pointed down toward a small cabin nestled in a cottonwood grove near a creek bend. "Old Trapper's place," he said. "Empty since last winter. We'll stay there tonight." Inside, the air was stale with dust, but the walls stood solid. A cold hearth sat in the center, and a cot leaned against the far wall. Roman set to building a fire while Nola shook out the blankets she'd carried with her. Gideon helped gather kindling, proud when Roman nodded in approval. That night, after the children fell asleep curled together beneath a quilt, Nola stood near the fire and watched the flames shift. Roman sat across from her, rolling his sleeves back, his arms marked with the faint, pale lines of old wounds. "You ever think about settling down?" she asked, not looking at him. He answered slow. "Sometimes, thought I might once, but things turned." She turned toward him, and now he met her eyes. "Now I'm thinking again." The fire cracked, sending a soft bloom of sparks into the chimney's dark. Nola stepped closer, close enough that her skirt brushed the edge of his boot. She didn't reach for him. Just stood there, steady and quiet, the way a tree stands after a long wind. Roman didn't move either, but his gaze didn't leave hers. Outside, the wind sighed through the cottonwoods. Inside, the warmth held. Neither spoke again that night, but when she lay down beside the children, her breathing eased. And Roman sat awake a little longer, watching the fire burn low, something in him settling for the first time in a long while. By morning, ice had formed in the corners of the window pane, thin and fragile as a moth's wing. Roman had risen early, slipping outside before the sun had cleared the ridge. The sound of his axe echoed through the trees as he split dry pine for the hearth. When he returned, Nola stood at the stove, coaxing a flame beneath a dented kettle with the steady patience of someone used to making do. Grace sat on the floor, weaving a loop of string between her fingers. Gideon had taken up a stick and was drawing slow lines in the dust near the door, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. Roman set the firewood down and rubbed his palms together. "You lived in a place like this before?" Nola asked without turning. "Not this quiet," he said. "There was always cattle, men coming and going, noise at every edge." She poured hot water into a tin cup and passed it to him. "I think I could live like this. If there was enough food growing, enough hands to keep things running." "You planning to stay once you reach your sister?" Nola looked toward the window where the trees swayed in the early light. "She's got 4 children already. One more mouth would be a kindness." 3 might be too much." Roman didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt beside Gideon, watching the boy's careful marks in the dirt. "You drawing something?" he asked. Gideon nodded. "A fort with a tower and a gate you pull up with ropes." Roman studied it. "Looks solid." "You build it, you'd better make sure it's got a warm roof." The boy grinned, then went back to his work. Later, when they packed the last of the food into the satchel and saddled the mare, Roman kept glancing toward the line of hills to the south. Tracks had cut through the soft earth near the creek, too fresh to ignore. Not wagon wheels, not a single rider. Nola noticed him studying the ground. "You expecting someone?" she asked. "No," he said, swinging up into the saddle. "That's the problem." They kept moving west, following the slope of the land into lower country where sagebrush grew thick and the sun held longer. Roman rode ahead now, his rifle tucked under his leg, eyes sweeping the horizon. The air smelled of dust and dry grass, and somewhere far off, a hawk cried once before the silence swallowed it. By midday, Nola's voice broke the quiet. "That wound on your arm, the one near your elbow, what happened?" Roman didn't look back. "Barbed wire." "Trying to catch a runaway calf." "Not from a fight, no," he said. "I've had those too, but that one wasn't." She was quiet a moment, then said, "You ever miss it, the ranch life?" He shook his head. "Not the work, not the men I rode with, maybe the mornings. The way the mist hung low over the fields before the world woke." "I used to wake early in Kansas," Nola said. "Not because I had to, just like the quiet, before anyone needed anything from me." Roman glanced over his shoulder. "You ever think about going back?" "There's no one left there." They made camp in a thicket of cottonwoods near a dry wash. Roman laid a snare near the edge of a game trail while Nola rolled out blankets. That night they ate what was left of the pork and passed the canteen between them. Grace fell asleep with Nola's shawl wrapped around her head. Gideon leaned against Roman's knee, too tired to sit up straight. When the fire burned low, Roman spoke again. "There's a town west of here, Silverton. Not as far as Durango, but it's got a school, church, and a cooper who's always hiring." Nola watched the flames lick at the last of the wood. "You think we'd be welcome there?" "I think they're used to folks starting over." She didn't answer right away. "Then you planning to settle there?" "I could," he said, his voice low, "if there was reason." Gideon stirred, curling closer to the warmth, and Nola gently draped a blanket over him. Her hands paused, then rested lightly against the boy's back. She looked at Roman across the fire, her face unreadable but calm. "I've never had someone stay," she said. "Not past the hard part. I'm not most men, I know." The fire cracked once, then settled. Roman leaned back against his saddle, his hat pulled low, but he didn't sleep for a long time. Across from him, Nola's breath evened out, her body curled protectively around the children. He watched as a thin breeze lifted a strand of her hair, and something inside him finally stilled. He'd come west to bury the weight of what he'd lost. But now, walking beside this woman who met each day with quiet grit, who didn't ask for more than she gave, he found himself thinking not about what he'd left behind, but about what he might build next. And for the first time in years, he didn't dread the dawn. They reached Silverton just after noon. The sky stretched wide and pale over the San Juan peaks, sunlight catching on the slate roofs and the narrow train tracks that curved into town like a drawn thread. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, and the sound of a bell rang out once from beyond the churchyard. Roman led the horse down the main street, his coat dusted from the trail, his eyes flicking toward the storefronts. Nola rode behind him, her skirt damp from creek water, one hand resting gently on Grace's waist. Gideon had fallen asleep slumped against the saddle horn, his hat tipped low. The town was quiet, but not unfriendly. A man stacking flour sacks outside the mercantile tipped his hat. A woman sweeping her porch paused to study the children, her gaze lingering on Nola's worn boots. Roman stopped in front of a livery stable and dismounted. "We'll get the mare seen to, then find a place to stay." Nola looked down the street, blinking against the sharp sun. "You think there's room at the boarding house?" Worth asking. Inside the stable, the air smelled of hay and sweat. A boy barely older than Gideon stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag. Roman handed over the reins. "She's trail-weary. Keep her inside tonight if you can." The boy nodded and led the mare away without a word. Outside, Roman turned to Nola. "I know a man here. Used to run freight between here and Montrose. If he's still around, he might know where to find work." She nodded, her eyes steady. "I'll take the children and ask about the boarding house." They split at the corner, Roman heading west toward the blacksmith's yard while Nola guided the children up the boardwalk, her back straight despite her worn dress and the limp in her left foot she hadn't mentioned since the second day. The woman behind the boarding house counter wore her hair in a tight coil and spoke with the clipped efficiency of someone who'd seen more travelers than seasons. 2 rooms open, nothing fancy, meals at dawn and dusk, children eat half price." Nola glanced down at Grace, then up again. "We'll take one." She used the last of her folded bills, carefully counting each note and coin. Upstairs, the room smelled of soap and wood oil. The mattress sagged in the middle, but the window faced the hills, and the quilt was thick enough to hold warmth. She settled the children in, then changed her blouse and tied her hair back before stepping outside. Roman was already waiting near the post office, arms crossed, gaze on the far ridge. "Saw your friend. He's gone north," Roman said. "Took a job hauling ore to Leadville, but the Cooper's hiring. And there's talk of needing hands at the mill once the runoff slows." "I asked about laundry work at the boarding house," Nola said. "They said they'd let me know after Sunday." Roman shifted his weight. "I can take the mill if it comes to it." She studied him, not unkindly. "You planning to stay that long?" "I haven't changed my mind." They walked together toward the edge of town, where the last of the fences gave way to open land, and the creek ran slow beside a line of elderberries. The children, rested now, chased each other along the bank, their laughter rolling over the water. Nola drew a breath and let it out slow. "I thought we'd keep going, that I had to get them to my sister or I'd be failing them." "You haven't failed them," Roman said. "I know, but I still worry. About what comes next, about whether I can give them enough." He watched the wind catch the hem of her sleeve. "Maybe it's not about giving them everything. Maybe it's just showing them what it looks like to stand still and stay." She looked up at him, eyes clear. "You think that's enough?" "I think it's more than most ever get," Grace called from across the creek. "Aunt Nola, look, I found a feather." Nola smiled, the kind that didn't need to be held back. Roman didn't reach for her. He didn't have to. She stepped closer, her shoulder brushing his as they watched the children dart through the grass. "You never said what you're looking for," she said softly. "I didn't know before, And now he turned to her, his voice low. "Now I think it might be this." She nodded once, then reached down and took his hand. Not hesitant, not questioning, and Roman Beckett, who had ridden west with nothing but a name and a past he couldn't shake, felt the weight of every mile ease from his shoulders. They stood like that as the sun dipped behind the ridge, the creek glinting like thread beneath the sky, and the children's laughter rolling on like the promise of something just beginning. The first snow came early that year, a soft dusting that clung to rooftops and turned the breath of horses to clouds. Roman lifted a crate of firewood onto the porch of the small house he had helped patch up on the edge of town, a place that had once belonged to a widow who moved east to live with her son. Now it was home. Inside, Nola stirred stew in a kettle hung over the hearth, sleeves rolled to her elbows, cheeks flushed from the warmth. Grace and Gideon sat at the table, sorting through a jar of buttons they'd found in the mercantile's discard box, each one laid out with great care as if it were treasure. Roman stepped in, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Mill's closing early," he said, setting his gloves by the stove. "Water wheels starting to ice up. They figure to shut down until thaw." Nola turned. "That'll mean weeks," he nodded, pulling off his coat. "We've got enough set by." She stirred the pot once more before turning to him, wooden spoon tucked in the crook of her elbow. "You always know what we need before I ask." "I've been watching," he said, voice quiet. "It matters to me." She looked at him then, her eyes steady in a way that still caught him off guard. "I know." After supper, they walked behind the house, the children darting ahead to kick at the snow along the fence line. The sky stretched out, stars low and sharp, the air cold enough to bite through wool. Roman held Nola's hand as they made their way toward the shed he'd rebuilt from scavenged boards. "I want to ask you something," he said, stopping at the door. She tilted her head, breath forming a faint cloud. "Go on." He pulled a small box from his coat pocket, the lid worn smooth from months of his fingers running over it. He didn't open it, just held it out. "I don't want to go back to riding alone, or sleeping under trees, or wondering if I'll see morning with both boots still on. I want to stay. With you, with the children, if you'll have me, I want to build a life here, one that holds." She didn't reach for the box. She stepped in close, took his face in her hands, and kissed him slow, the cold forgotten between them. "I've been waiting for you to say it," she whispered. He opened the box, then an old gold band, plain save for a single etched line, something he'd traded for at the Silverton General Store months ago. She slid it onto her finger. They didn't tell the children until the next morning, when Gideon came in with snow on his eyelashes and Grace trailing behind carrying a pine cone like it was a trophy. "We're getting married," Nola said, kneeling beside them. Grace blinked. Like in church, Roman crouched next to her. "Just us." "And anyone who wants to come." Gideon looked between them. "Do we get cake?" "Of course," Roman said. They married 2 weeks later in the parlor of the boarding house, with the preacher from San Juan Street reading the vows slow and clear. Grace wore a ribbon in her hair. Gideon carried a sprig of pine in his coat pocket for no reason other than it made him feel important. The townsfolk came with fresh biscuits and preserves. Mrs. Halsey from the bakery brought a pie. Russell from the homestead showed up with a bottle of something sharp that made Roman cough but laugh all the same. That night, after the children had fallen asleep curled together under a new quilt someone had stitched as a gift, Nola and Roman stood outside under the same stars they'd walked beneath weeks before. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, her back warm against his chest. "You ever think it'd feel like this?" she asked. "I didn't know how it could," he said. She leaned into him. "When I first saw you by that wagon, I didn't know if we'd live through the night. You did more than live." They stayed like that, the snow falling soft around them, their breath rising in quiet clouds. By spring, Roman had taken over the mill's west shift, and Nola was washing linens for the boarding house twice a week, while Grace and Gideon helped tend a small plot behind the house. Green shoots came up through the thawed earth, and the children marked each new sprout like it was a miracle. The town held steady. There was talk of a schoolhouse being built past the creek, and Roman had already volunteered to help raise the frame. He'd taken to walking with Gideon at dusk, showing him how to read a trail, how to listen for the wind's change. Grace had taken to writing her letters in the dust on the windowsill, and Nola had begun saving for a slate and chalk. Some evenings, they sat on the porch, Nola's hand in Roman's, the children chasing fireflies across the yard. The days weren't perfect. Boots wore thin, colds crept in, tempers flared then cooled, but they were theirs. Earned, held with care, Roman never rode out again. He had nowhere else to go that mattered more. And in the quiet moments when the house was still and the night wrapped close around them, Nola would rest her head against his shoulder and know, without doubt, that they had survived not just the road, but all the years before it, and they had made it home.